Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining Defending Rights in Dissent. My name is Chip Gibbons, and I am the Policy Director of Defending Rights in Dissent. Recently, a whistleblower and nurse named Dawn Wooten shocked the world with horrifying revelations about human rights abuses being committed in ICE detention centers in Georgia, including the performing of hysterectomies without proper consent of the patients. To learn more about what's really going on in ICE detention centers, we're joined this evening by Azadeh Shahshahani. In addition to being a Defending Rights in Dissent board member, Azadeh is the Legal and Advocacy Director of Project South, which, along with the Government Accountability Project, or GAP, is representing Ms. Wooten, the whistleblower. Azadeh is also the past president of the National Lawyers Guild. She previously served as director of the National Security Immigrants' Rights Project for the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. She has worked for a number of years in the U.S. South to protect the human rights of immigrants, Muslims, Middle Easterns, and South Asian communities, as she's the co-author and editor of several human rights reports, including most relevant to us tonight, Imprisoned Justice, Inside Two Immigrant Detention Centers in Georgia. You may have seen her on Democracy Now! Or read her writings in The Nation and Jacobin. Azadeh, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with the big question that I think is the reason a lot of people have tuned in. As I mentioned, Project South, along with GAP, is representing an ICE whistleblower. Her complaint has really reverberated around the world due to the horrific human rights abuses it depicts. Could you run us through what it is she has exposed? And just for people watching at home, I want to warn you, some of this content is quite disturbing.
Right. So, Wooten came forward with everything, the human rights violations that, we've been documenting also for a number of years, but in hearing from a whistleblower who was a nurse at the facility, some of these revelations are truly shocking. So, for example, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and the facility refused to test people. I should say that that was the practice up until Project South filed a complaint with ICE and with the Department of Homeland Security Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and then the facility started testing people. In terms of the medical procedures that were done on women's bodies, and more and more is being revealed about that every day as attorneys are coming forward. We are tracking down women all over the world who were subjected to violence, procedures without their consent. And so, it is truly horrifying, to think about the picture where immigrant women at the mercy of ICE and this private prison corporation that was running this facility, the LaSalle Corporation, with very little control over their bodies. And remember, many women are not also necessarily proficient in English. So there's a question as to, in any situation, there is a question about informed consent in a prison setting. In a situation where it's not clear if people are being provided information in their native tongue. And in this case, women went in for minor issue, and then the next thing they know, a procedure that they had not consented to was performed on their body. So one case that has been widely reported on, Pauline Bingham, she went in for a minor procedure, and then her fallopian tube was removed, which left her sterilized. And so here you have a situation where women are being subjected to long-term damage on their bodies. And these were people in the custody of U.S. government.
It's, I'm familiar with the complaints, but listening to you speak them out loud, it's just so chilling and so disturbing. And no matter how many times I hear this, it's just the emotional impact. You never get over it. What does international law say about these types of forced sterilizations?
Illegal.
Yes.
Unlawful. And I should say, now that you mention it, we are very much going to go to the United Nations and have already been to the United Nations. So in collaboration with the Penn Law Transnational Legal Clinic, Project South, in the past several years has submitted several communications to the United Nations special rapporteurs, who are basically experts on international human rights, as well as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And we have requested action. We have requested a thematic hearing on the issue of grave human rights violations at these detention centers. And I should say the special rapporteurs actually wrote to the US government and the prison corporations and expressed concern about the treatment of people at Georgia detention centers. And as far as we know, they have not heard back. So, we know that the Mexican government is concerned about the treatment of their nationals at this detention center. Potentially other governments and the world needs to be concerned. And so hopefully there will be accountability for the US government as well as the prison corporation that ran this facility.
Yeah, and I guess Project South, as you've mentioned, has been involved in exposing conditions in Georgia's immigration detention centers for a long time. You and I were at a Defending Rights and Dissent Nation magazine town hall about COVID and civil liberties, and you talked about this issue there. But could you run through some of what Project South has found over the years, and how does that compare to what the whistleblower has come forward with?
Yeah, so I encourage folks to read our report, which you mentioned in the introduction. Imprisoned Justice is a report that we put out in 2017 in collaboration with the law clinic at Penn State Law. Documents a host of human rights violations at both of the big immigration detention centers in Georgia, Stewart and Irving. Both of them are corporate run. So at Irving, an issue particular to what we've been talking about, we documented the lack of reproductive health care, lack of prenatal care for pregnant women. An issue that women have had to confront for a number of years at Irving is a lack of new underwear. So women have been wearing used underwear, which has led to infections and a host of other issues. The hygiene situation is, something that's been just horrible. The food, and that's just, at one of the facilities. At the other detention center, the Stewart Detention Center, the deadly facility. 7 people have died since May 2017, 3 of them during the pandemic. And there is a forced labor program at this facility, meaning that the private prison corporation is making money off of the labor of immigrants. It's basically relying on immigrants for running the facility, for performing the chores like cleaning the kitchen or cooking and things of the sort, while paying them sub-minimum wages, so between $1 to $4 a day. So obviously, great win-win situation for the prison corporation, exploiting immigrant labor. And so we are involved in a class action lawsuit currently along with other organizations, and we hope to put an end to this practice, as well as shutting these places down. That's what we want. We are not aiming to make these prisons prettier. We want to shut them down.
Yeah, and it's interesting you keep bringing up private prisons, because I believe that immigrant detention along with juvenile detention are one of the 2 forms of detention in the United States where private prison practices or private prison companies really play an outsized role compared to sort of federal or state prisons. And I believe the first experiments with prison privatization during the Reagan administration was with immigrant detention. Could you talk a little bit about the role of these private companies in detaining immigrants?
Well, after 9/11, they found a very profitable business in imprisoning immigrant bodies, and so Currently, it's more than 70% of immigrants in ICE custody are held in facilities operated by private prison corporations,
That's a
including.
shocking number. That is just
Yeah,
shocking.
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that is shocking.
So I mean, as a next step, if we just get the private prisons out of this business of imprisoning, human bodies, we would make a huge, that would be a huge step forward in terms of shutting down and dismantling mass incarceration. And so, what used to be called the Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, changed their name to Core Civic, precisely because of the horrid history associated with CCA. And so, they made that business judgment to change their name, and obviously that did not erase the record. So this is the same prison corporation, the largest prison corporation in the country, that is operating the Stewart Detention Center, the facility that I was just talking about. There have been 7 deaths, 2 of them by suicide, and there's a forced labor program at this facility.
So this brings me to a question I was going to get to later, but I'm going to ask it right now. Are conditions in ICE detention in Georgia representative of conditions in ICE detention across the United States?
So I can only speak to the conditions in Georgia facilities because that's, the work I've been doing. But from what we're hearing, there are massive human rights violations occurring at these detention centers during the pandemic, before the pandemic. People are dying. And the question is, why isn't Congress paying attention? We are very glad that the complaint that we filed on September 14th has finally generated the type of public outcry that we need, that has pushed Congress to actually take action. So this past weekend, we have 12 members of Congress coming down and visiting the Irving Detention Center and seeing with their own eyes, even with the short time that they had inside, still being able to, talk to people a little bit, seeing what it is that we're talking about. And so, members of Congress are now calling for this facility to be shut down, which is something we have been demanding for a long time. And that's a positive step. And again, that is because of the public pressure.
That's really good to hear. Someone who works, on a lot of other adjacent issues with human rights and surveillance and civil liberties, there's always, the question, where is Congress? Why have they abrogated their oversight responsibilities? And the fact that you can actually get them to maybe exercise them is really positive development. And we've talked about some really dark, disturbing stuff tonight. I want to move to maybe a slightly more hopeful note, which is how are activists and organizers in Georgia responding to these human rights abuses?
Well, we are doing the same thing we've always been doing, which is organizing, documenting the human rights violations. Documenting is very important. Talking to directly impacted people, making sure that their voices are heard. And banding together to push forward our demand. People in Georgia have already been successful in forcing the city of Atlanta to end its collusion with ICE. That happened as a result of a multi-year campaign, and that happened in September 2018. Now, we did not stop there. We're part of a larger coalition led by formerly incarcerated Black and trans women, and our demand is to shut down this jail altogether. We do not need jails, so we're hoping to replace it with a community center. So that was a very hopeful step for us. In Georgia, we're obviously, we're dealing with very difficult political atmosphere, but it is possible because of organizing and long-term movement building. And we hope to keep the pressure up. If folks around the country could help us by keeping the pressure up on Congress, we cannot let Irving stay open even for one more day. People are suffering.
That was going to be my next question, is for people who are watching at home, especially those who may not live in Georgia. and are horrified by what they're hearing, how can they get involved? Keeping pressure on Congress, is there a specific ask they should be given, a specific committee they should be targeting, a piece of legislation, or just demanding of every member of Congress that they do oversight?
Yeah, I mean, oversight, talk to your representative, talk to your senator. We have already been talking to some members of Congress, and hopefully there will be hearing. There needs to be communication with every member of Congress. This is not a partisan issue, but we have not heard any Republicans yet that I know of come forward and condemn this massive, human rights violation on women's bodies. So that is one step. And then for folks who want to support, please support the organizations that are based in Georgia and have been doing the work. In addition to Project South, the Georgia Latina Alliance for Human Rights, Georgia Detention Watch, and South Georgia Support Network came together and put forward this complaint to the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General, which exposed these violations. And we should also all be supporting Ms. Wooten. Let's remember that she's an extremely courageous person who is basically going up against the US government and the private prison corporation, LaSalle. So we should all be doing whatever we can in order to support her.
And Defending Rights and Dissent has a long history of standing with whistleblowers. We organized the first demonstration in support of Chelsea Manning. We organized one of the earliest demonstrations in favor of Edward Snowden. We've been up on the Hill trying to educate members of Congress about the issues faced by national security whistleblowers, which is a different set of issues, but it's an uphill battle. So I do think people need to realize how courageous whistleblowers are and how motivated by their conscience they are to come forward. Being a whistleblower, I think it's heroic, but they take on a lot of, repercussions for doing so. And I don't think we always appreciate the tremendous risk to themselves that they do when they make these actions. And, people of conscience should always be our heroes.
Absolutely.
So for people who want to learn more about Project South or your work, where on the internet can they go to get this information?
Well, we are at Project South. That's our address on Twitter, and we're also on Instagram and Facebook, and projectsouth.org is our website. So please visit us, and for folks in the South, please come visit us. We in regular times we have a lot of in-person convenings. Nowadays we have a lot of online convenings. We just had a webinar focused on U.S. imperialism and the connections to white supremacy and how to dismantle U.S. imperialism. So we heard from folks with roots in countries that have been invaded by the U.S. And have been bombed by the U.S. in the past couple of decades, including Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And that's part of our quarterly webinar series focused on making connections with comrades in the global South and kind of learning from each other. So we hope that you all are able to join us for the next webinar, and also a host of other convenings, movement learning opportunities. There's a program that we just tweeted about happening very soon. So please join us, because we all need each other in these difficult times, and we should support each other.
Azadeh, every time I talk to you, you are involved in so many great activities. Just those webinars you listed. I knew about your involvement in challenging ICE detention, your involvement with the whistleblower. Just always so blown away by all the great work you're doing. And I think I speak for everyone at Defending Rights and Dissent that we are immensely honored and privileged to have you on our board of directors. Any last bits of information the viewers should know before we close out?
Stay involved. We need your support absolutely on Ervin, so please keep pushing, but also please get involved in the local fights. We need to shut these places down, all of them around the country, and we need to abolish ICE. So please look out, find a grassroots local organization that is doing the work to try to shut these places down, and support them, reach out to them, and see what kind of help you can provide.
Uh, Thank you, Azadeh, and thank you everyone at home for joining Defending Rights in Dissent for what has been an important briefing exposing what's really taking place in our country's immigration detention centers. I know a lot of the information we heard tonight was very disturbing. I went into this knowing what I was going to hear, but you know, every time it still shocks me to my core what's happening in this country to the most vulnerable and marginalized amongst us. Uh, Defending Rights in Dissent will always support your right to know and your freedom to act. And for more information, please visit us on the web at rightsanddissent.org. We're on Twitter at rightsdissent. And once again, if you want to follow Project South, please go to projectsouth.org. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a good evening.